and the Emergency Committee for Displaced German Academics, which brought several dozen important German scientists to Turkey. And those people appear in the pages of La Turquie Kemalist. Among the Turkish authors, we find a number of the best-known intellectuals of the period. People like Reşit Galip, Vedat Nedim Tör, Ercüment Ekrem Talu, Falih Rıfkı Atay, Şevket Süreyya Aydemir, Burhan Belge. And among the literary figures, we find Said Faik Abbasyanık, and surprisingly, for a Kemalist publication, the godfather of Islamism in modern Turkey, Necip Fazıl Kısakürek. Necip Fazıl Kısakürek, very interesting figure in his own right, a man, a secularist who underwent a sudden conversion to Naqshbandi Islam in the mid-30s and continued and evolved to be one of the most respected people among conservative Islamists today. The contributions he made to Turkey Kemalist predate, of course, his conversion. The iconography of the journal, the pictures, as shown by the covers I have here, is very interesting and literally gives us a picture of modernity as envisaged by the Kemalists. Let's look again. What do we have here? Well, clearly what we see is sun rays in combination with smokestacks. And that becomes even clearer in the second one. And you see very clearly all kinds of icons of modernity in the picture here. In the foreground, one of the great novelties of the day, a tractor of the Soviet type, you see. Then a train crossing a viaduct, and up above, all kinds of industrial buildings, power stations, and again, smokestacks. Smokestacks that would carry a very different meaning today, at the time, are emblems of progress and modernity. I mentioned that in definitions of modernity, like those by Shmuel Eisenstadt, one element is this belief in the power of human will and of human endeavor to bring progress. And this very secularist conception that it is man that brings progress and nothing else. Well, you could say, and that is very clearly symbolized in this picture. We see man pushing aside, as it were, the darkness and introducing a brighter future, this industrialized modern Turkey. After a very interesting change in style that we see here, and which is reminiscent of the Mexican social realist Diego Rivera, who worked at the same time, of course. This is very exceptional. And you could almost say this is clearly socialist inspired. After that, by the end of the 30s, the journal reverts to the more the classical Kemalist, Ataturkist iconography, much more conformist. Here, of course, there are no specific references to modernity. It is the leader himself who is foregrounded. Now, the subject matter of the journal is varied, but a number of recurrent themes emerge, and it's primarily these recurrent themes, because, after all, if they are constantly repeated, they must have meant something to the Kemalist, that I will try to present today with some analysis. Most of the themes are directly related to the message that the Republican government wants to convey, but some, like the category called Turkey, Land of Sun, Beauty and History, which recurs in almost every issue of the journal, are clearly aimed at European tastes and even European tourism. The European audience is often addressed directly or indirectly, and the message is the same throughout. European journalists, travelers, visitors, and intellectuals in general are reminded that the new Turkey cannot be understood by reference to the past. Reference, for instance, to the romantic novels of Pierre Loti, which are set in Istanbul, and particularly in the harems of Istanbul, and which enjoyed a great popularity at the end of the 19th century in all over Europe. A very usual way, a very, very common way of the European public to look at Turkey through the prism of Pierre Loti's novels, or, for instance, through the prism of the older travel guides, like Baedeker's. They should no longer look for the quaint or the picturesque, the oriental, but instead open their eyes and the eyes of their readership to the daring experiment that is being conducted in Anatolia. In other words, and these are the words of one of the authors in the journal, Westerners should reject the romantic and accept the revolutionary Turkey. The fact that most of the foreign correspondents continue to cover Turkey from Istanbul, and indeed most of the diplomats were still resident in Istanbul, that is considered an insult. It comes in for a lot of criticism because, as one article states, Istanbul is Turkey's past, Ankara is its future. Now, what transpires is clearly a suggestion that the Europeans are prejudiced and do not give Turkey a fair chance, do not evaluate it objectively. Now that, of course, is a feeling that has persisted in Turkey and is still very much with us today. Now let me try to highlight what seem to me to be the dominant themes in the 49 issues of the journal. First of all, it concerns this: science and education. The Kemalists are Young Turks. They are an offspring of the Young Turk movement, just like the Unionists before them that have ruled the country between 1908 and 1918. They're all part of this Young Turk movement that comes into existence in the final decade of the 19th century. And these people shared a number of characteristics. They were deeply influenced by current European, particularly French thinking. A number of, in a sense, a mix of different currents that are popular in Europe at the time. It is a mix of positivism, on the one hand, and the ideology of Auguste Comte, which stipulates that there is only one single scientific method, and that you can analyze history and society precisely in exactly the same way as you can analyze physics or chemistry. That there is a single scientific method, and that you can discover the laws of society just like you can discover the laws of nature. That brought with it, of course, an enormous trust in science, a belief in science. And just as in the Soviet Union, a contemporary state, and science becomes almost a fetish. Linked to this positivism is also the what is originally a very different European word, materialism. And so these Kemalists, like the other Young Turks, are under the influence of positivism, rationalism, materialism, a cocktail that has sometimes been called scientism. Now, when we look at the journal, we see that science is very much in focus. Pictures like this occur very frequently. They are an important element of this image of the new Turkey. It's science and it's education. The difference with the Soviet Union is that there does not seem to be an interest in fundamental research per se. The science that is focused on is applied science in the service of health, engineering, agriculture, or stock breeding. Education of younger generations serves two parallel goals. One is to install this enlightened and inquisitive and science-minded attitude in the pupils, and the other is to produce a new class of professionals to man the new industries, but also to produce the new veterinary surgeons, the new agricultural engineers, and so on and so forth. And that is very much in the Ottoman tradition. In the Ottoman Empire had been modernizing all through the 19th century, and it had founded, the Ottoman government at times had founded a great many new educational institutions. But these were all geared towards the production of modern bureaucrats, modern officers, modern lawyers, modern engineers, and people to man the expanding Ottoman state, not out of, let's say, academic or scientific curiosity. And the what we would call vocational schools, schools training engineers or veterinary surgeons, are much older in Turkey and in the Ottoman Empire than are universities. So it is an Ottoman tradition, this attention to applied science and this effort to create new cadres, new professional cadres through education. And that yields some wonderful photographs, of course, very moving pictures of the new generations of the Republic being taught about the world. Science and education, in other words, is one theme that keeps coming back, and it's clearly one crucial element in this Kemalist view of modernity. Another one is, of course, industrialization. And not surprisingly, like everyone else, and like everywhere else, industrialization was absolutely central to the Kemalists and to their concept of modernity. We find discussions of the 5-year plans of the Republic, reports on agro-industries, sugar, tobacco processing, fig packing, and of course on the two showpieces of Kemalist industrialization, the Soviet-built big cotton textile mill in Kayseri, and the British-built steel mill in Karabük. When the new exhibition hall in Ankara was completed, its first exhibition, described in detail in the Turkish Kemalist, was devoted to the progress of industrialization. Railway building, which is of course closely linked to industrialization, comes in for coverage as well. And both in the text and in some of the pictures we see traces of the importance attached to statistics. In fact, if you see pictures of these early exhibitions, they're almost the only thing on show. Endless statistics showing growing production, ever-lengthening railways, more roads being built. And the importance attached to statistics showing growth and progress is undoubtedly linked to this belief in science, and that you have to have evidence-based realities. And it's something that contemporary travelers in Turkey remark on, and that in the 30s and 40s there was almost a religious veneration for statistics. Again, there is a strong parallel, of course, with the Soviet Union there. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that statistics create their own reality. They're not necessarily a reflection of reality. Now, the rationale behind the industrialization drive is to be self-supporting, autarky, making Turkey self-sufficient and independent of foreign imports. Turkey, after all, we're now in, let's say, 1937, 38. Turkey for 15 years has been a proudly independent country that has gained its independence through war. And now it wants to become economically independent too. In this context, there are many references to the system of capitulations that had been in force until the Young Turk predecessors of the Kemalists abolished them in September 1914. The capitulations, for those of you who are not so familiar with Turkey, the capitulations were the legal system, a system of treaties under which citizens of European states were granted two important privileges. They were granted tax freedom, a very low and limited taxation in the Ottoman Empire, and they were granted a degree of legal freedom. And they were issues between citizens of European states could be dealt with by consular tribunals which worked under European law. So, and that created a kind of extraterritoriality. These people could not be touched by the Ottoman government. And that becomes a problem in the 19th century when Europeans start to hand out their citizenship, their protection, to ever larger numbers of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. By the late 18th century, there are only about 1,500 people under the capitulations in the whole empire. A century later, by the end of the 19th century, it's hundreds of thousands. So, and that means that hundreds of thousands of people enjoyed tax freedom and legal freedom within the Ottoman Empire, could not be touched. Now that was felt as essentially as what it was.